Nu står vi her ved indgangen til London Tower og skal ind og se. Men vi skal lige vente. Vi skal lige vente en halv times tid, fordi så er der en guided tur med. Det skal vi se, har vi besluttet. Eller høre, hedder det vist.
Right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone happy?
Yeah.
Put a stop to that. Welcome to Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress of Tower of London, which is designated a World Heritage Site. My name is Yeoman Warder Scott Kelly. I am one of 37 Yeoman Warders, nicknamed the Beefeaters, that live here in the Tower of London at all times, on bequest of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. More about us later. Now, before I commence, I notice there's some young faces in the audience. My tour will contain murder, execution, and my favourite, torture. So if it's not for your little ears, feel free to leave my tour anytime you like. Children, Harry Potter world is that way. Secondly, are there any Americans, Canadians, Australians in the audience? Put your hands up now. Welcome home. I'll show you where you're all staying later. Ah, hello, peasants. Be gone. Yes, that's my mum and dad. Stayed the weekend, I've just kicked them out. Right. Now I'm going to give you a wee bit of history, but more importantly, I'm going to entertain you because I am the best looking beefeater in the Tower of London. Do not take my word for it. Look at my colleagues and you'll see exactly what I mean. There have only ever been 411 Yeoman Warders since records began. More about us later. Now, when was this built? Anybody know? That's what I'm going to tell you, isn't it? Now our story begins, ladies and gentlemen, way back in the year 1066, when William, Duke of Normandy, better known as William the Conqueror, defeated the Anglo-Saxon King Harold at the Battle of Hastings. There are times, ladies and gentlemen, I will want you to join in. Failure to do so will result in you going to the Tower's torture exhibit. Some of you might like it. William was crowned King William I of England on Christmas Day that same year, but he had to continue to fight his newly conquered subjects, as they did not take kindly to Norman domination. Now William looked to locate a citadel so he could command and control the citizens of London, and he chose a site on the eastern edge of the city wall where once an old Roman fort had stood. It was here, ladies and gentlemen, in 1078 that he would authorise the building of his first royal palace and fortress here in England. Today we refer to that building as the White Tower, and it is situated behind these magnificent defensive walls. There's no point in looking, you cannot see it from here. It's going to be a long tour, this. By the way, if I seem slightly croaky, it is because I have man flu. The strain I have would kill 10 civilians. But as I'm a beefeater, I'm still here. Huzzah! All happy? Good. Feel sorry for me later. Now, the inner Ballium defensive wall consists of 13 smaller towers that were completed in 1220. The outer wall contains 6 further towers that are all situated on the southern edge to defend the tower from any attack that may come up the River Thames. You, ladies and gentlemen, are all currently standing in the third line of defence, which is the moat or ditch, and was once filled with water from the River Thames. Now, twice a day, at high tide, the river would have flown into around the moat, keeping it clean. Now, this worked rather well at first. However, due to the amount of rubbish and excrement, that's poo, children, directed into it from the tower and the local areas of Shoreditch and Houndsditch, the moat soon became known as the largest cesspit in London, a source of pestilence to all those who live nearby, especially the 1,000 soldiers based here in the Tower garrison. Now this cesspit continued for over 500 years, until in 1843, the then Constable of the Tower, the Duke of Wellington, asked permission from Queen Victoria to have the moat drained. Permission was granted, and the Duke had it filled in with sand and shingle, up to the height that you are currently standing on it today. He then made good use of it as an ice rink. The things we do for money. Hideous thing. It will be gone soon. Right, now before I lead you into the oldest part of the Tower of London, we're going to walk beneath the Bywood Tower archway behind you. Or look at that archway right now. Above, you will see the site of a portcullis or Norman dropgate. This is one of two portcullises. There is an area called Trinity Square Gardens. That was the site of many executions between the 14th and 18th centuries. King Edward IV had a permanent scaffold erected up there, which caused much concern to the people of the city, having a public execution site on their south lawn. Over the years, no less than 75 men of noble birth were to lose their heads up there by means of a solid block of oak and an axe. The first victim was Simon Sudbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who was murdered by the hands of peasants in 1381 for daring to introduce a poll tax, more commonly referred to today as Brexit. 7 years later, in 1388, the first legal execution up on Tower Hill was that of Sir Simon Burley, and by sheer coincidence, the last victim in 1747 was another Simon, Simon Fraser, the Lord Lovat, an 80-year-old Scottish lord who supported the Second Jacobite Rebellion. Anyone in the audience called Simon? You're not going to last long, sir, here. Now, just for a moment, let us pause. Imagine the scene up there on the day of execution. Thousands, literally thousands of men, women, even children. It was classed as a family day out, would be gathered around a raised platform known as a scaffold to witness the proceedings. The prisoner, having said his final speech and prayers, would kneel down, placing his neck on a block of solid oak. He would then give a word or a signal to the executioner. The executioner would bring the axe crashing down, hopefully beheading his victim with one stroke, which rarely happened, ladies and gentlemen. The executioner would then pick up the severed, still bleeding head and raise it aloft for all to see, as was the custom between the 14th and 18th centuries, to show that the head had been separated from the torso. He would then turn to the crowd and proclaim, "Behold, the head of a traitor! So die all traitors! God save the king!" At this point, all the crowd would go wild with excitement. Queen does not pay me enough for this. That was your moment to become part of history, ladies and gentlemen. Some of you are not awake yet. So for some of you that are a bit shy, we're going to do that again. However, before we do, notice I picked the gentleman up by the hair. What would I have done if he was a bald man? Two other methods. Firstly, by the ears, but my preferred and selected method, inserted. Oh, you paid for this. So that the blood and entrails of his brain would trickle down his forearm for good effect. Grit, grit. But my personal favourite, you could play with the eyes. Gets better. Fortunately, this young man's got a good head of hair, and as the executioner did, he'd raise it aloft, turn to the crowd, and proclaim, "Behold, the head of a traitor! So die all traitors! God save the king!"
Whoa!
God save the king! Whoa! Better, but all of you work on it. The head would then be impaled onto a soldier's pike and paraded through the streets of London towards London Bridge, which in those days was the only bridge across the River Thames. Everybody now point to where they think London Bridge is.
We don't know.
Good. So where are you pointing to? That bridge is next to the Tower of London, making that bridge Tower, well done. Every day's a school day. London Bridge is the first one down on your right. The fake one the Americans brought. My American brothers and sisters, I will be ripping into you a lot today. But that's only because I love you. Right. Now, to lead a body of men, women and children at a rapid rate of knots into my fortress, as I am a sergeant major, I have a war cry. My war cry is huzzah! After 3, you will give me your best huzzah. If it's no good, you're going on your own tour. But before we do, part like the Red Sea to my right. Yes, you've seen the film, Moses, Red Sea. Excellent. Okay, on 3, let's feel it. 1, 2, 3. Huzzah! 1, 2, 3. Huzzah! Okay, let's go. Bit more effort. It's time now. It's not a gentle bimble. Storming in the fortress. Firstly, welcome to my home. You're now stood in the outer ward of the Tower of London between the inner and outer defensive wall. The inner wall is 50 feet high. The outer wall behind you is 28 feet thick. The road to your left is called Mint Street, because until the year 1810, all the coins of the realm were designed and produced in these buildings. The buildings that house the mint are known as the casemate or housed within the walls, and now the majority of them, plus that chain going across the road, serve as accommodation for my fellow yeoman water colleagues, their wives, their girlfriends, their unwanted children, and their dogs and their cats. To your right is a tall, dark, narrow archway known as a sallyport or royal entrance, beyond which was a small drawbridge leading out to the Queen's Stairs and directly down to the River Thames. Now, rather than travel for the narrow packed streets of London, royalty and nobility would travel down the River Thames in their luxurious barges, tie up by those gates to enter the tower. Those gates are original and date back over 750 years old. It was exactly beneath that archway that King Henry VIII got down on one knee and so lovingly greeted his second wife, Queen Anne Boleyn, mother of Queen Elizabeth I. Poor Anne was fated to return to the Tower some 3 years later, for a very different reason and for a very different gate. In front of you is the bell tower, so named because of the small white belfry at the top. It contains the oldest surviving curfew and alarm bell in the City of London. When sounded an alarm would signal for all the gates to be closed, the drop gates lowered, the drawbridges raised, and all the battlements manned in defence, as you can see an archer on top of the Beecham Tower. Now, the bell tower is the strongest of the 13 towers within the inner wall, but due to its form of construction, prisoners were held in both of these chambers. The man for all seasons, Sir Thomas More, one-time Lord Chancellor of England, was held in the lower chamber for refusing to accept King Henry VIII as head of the Church of England. At the same time, and for the same reason, John Fisher, the Bishop of Rochester, was held in the upper chamber, also known as the Strong Room. Now, both men were to suffer terribly, but neither would be persuaded to abandon their beliefs. In 1535, both men were taken from this tower up to Tower Hill for public execution. 400 years later, in 1935, both men were canonized as saints of the Roman Catholic faith. Now, another famous prisoner to be held in the Strong Room was a young, beautiful Princess Elizabeth Tudor. Her half-sister, Queen Mary Tudor, had reason to believe Elizabeth was implicated in the Sir Thomas Wyatt Rebellion, which was against the Queen's plans to marry King Philip II of Spain. Fortunately, she was proven innocent, although banished to Woodstock for a time. It would be 4 years until she had returned to the Tower of London for her very own coronation, and the last time the Queen would visit the Tower in her long reign of nearly 45 years. Now for some blood and gore. Are we ready?
Yeah.
We shall see. James Scott, the Duke of Monmouth, eldest of the 13 illegitimate children of King Charles II. He was a very busy man. He was also imprisoned in this tower. Now, after the death of his father in 1685, this handsome, popular young man, very much like myself, was persuaded to stake his claim to the throne. To press home his claim, he landed in the west country of England, marching inland, gaining popular Protestant support in what's to become known as the Monmouth Rebellion. Well, the revolt was crushed at the Battle of Sedgemoor on the 6th of July 1685, but the Duke escaped the battlefield and evaded capture for up to a week, until he was found hiding, cowering in a ditch. 3 days later, there was no need for a trial. He was taken from this tower up to Tower Hill for public beheading. This, ladies and gentlemen, was to be the bloodiest execution in English history. Get excited. The executioner went by the name of Jack Ketch. It is recorded Jack Ketch was 6'8" tall, verging on 20 stone. He was a giant of a man, but he was a part-time executioner. He was also a part-time butcher, but he was a full-time alcoholic, as most of them were back then, for various obvious reasons. On day of said execution, in a drunken stupor, it took Jack Ketch 5 strokes of the axe. The first came down, striking the Duke on the top of his right shoulder. The second stroke followed swiftly, but unfortunately just skimmed the top of his head. As the Duke knelt there, squealing in agony, one of the clergy in the front row pointed to Jack Ketch and stated, "Jack Ketch, if you do not complete this task, you, sir, will be next." Jack Ketch started to sweat profusely. In a drunken stupor, continued with the exit. 3 strokes later, he still hadn't severed the head from the body. Realizing now his life was in imminent danger, he pulled out his butcher's carving knife, grabbed the Duke by the hair, tilted his head back at a 45-degree angle, and then started to cut away through the bone and sinew until the head was off. Everyone's all right now?
No.
All good? There's a child. A 5-year-old child, approximately. You, young man at the back, come here quickly. Let him through.
Mark the way.
Quickly, quickly, quickly. Stand in front of me, face me. Face me, hands out. Flat. Look up. Catch. Away, man.
Yeah!
The head would then be displayed above the entrance of the city as a sign of the fate that awaited all would-be traitors. But for some reason, ladies and gentlemen, they brought the Duke's head back into the tower with his body, which never, ever happens. The head always goes at the entrance of London Bridge, but they brought it back in here. And the reason why they did this is as Jack Ketch was finishing the last cut through the bone and sinew, one of the clergy in the front row just remembered we didn't have a portrait of the Duke. Oh yes. So they brought him back in here. They literally stitched his head back to his body, dressed him up in all of his refinery. It makes for a beautiful watercolour. I've seen it. But I've got to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, he does not look happy. That is true, by the way. When we exhumed his body in 1876, we indeed found that his head had been reattached to his torso. You can't make this up. It's history. It's great. Right, enough of this blood and gore. We're going to head around the corner. But before we do, two things are going to happen. Anybody against this wall, dress 1 meter that way. Well done, sir. Now, as I've just been talking about a beheading, that's quite a serious one at that, I'm going to cheer you all up with my first joke. Now, I've been working on this one for 7 months. It's very short and sweet. I hope you enjoy it. Are you ready?
Yes.
Are you ready? Yeah. Okay, here we go. Let's be heading on. Come on, they get worse. Chop, chop.
Ja.
Probably for obvious reasons. The Queen House has been the home to some important officers and prisoners. Anybody here from Pennsylvania in the United States of America? No one? Right, we want to talk about him now. Ah, there we go. Hello, sir, madam, are we all right? We'll talk about one of your treasonous ancestors. William Penn was incarcerated in the top floor of the Queen's House for his offensive writings. Even whilst he was incarcerated, he still managed to compile his controversial pamphlet, No Cross, No Crown. He was only released under the condition that he left England. So he sailed across the Atlantic and found his famous Quaker colony, Pennsylvania, in honor of his father. Did you know that? Every day's a school day. King Henry VIII to be executed in the French manner, with the two-handed, double-edged broadsword. Henry agreed to Anne's last wish, so he tasked a French swordsman to come over from Calais. He was very sympathetic with Anne's plight. When he got on top of the scaffold, he placed the broadsword underneath some hay to cause as little stress to Anne as was physically possible. When Anne got on top of the scaffold, she didn't see the broadsword. She was deep in thought and prayer. Queen Anne Boleyn's last words on the scaffold were, "Lord God, have pity on my miserable soul." Now the executioner was so proficient and so precise, Anne didn't see it coming. As the executioner lifted up her head, as they do, there was a big gasp from the crowd, because her eyes were still moving around the crowd and her lips were still moving in prayer. Now 6 years later, in 1542, the axe unusually fell twice on the same day. This time the victims were Queen Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of King Henry VIII, and her lady-in-waiting, Jane Boleyn, the Viscountess of Rochford. Now Catherine was executed for associations with other men, both during and before her marriage to King Henry VIII. But it was her affair with Thomas Culpeper, a gentleman at court that was to be her undoing. Catherine's last words on the scaffold were, "I die the Queen of England, but would rather die the wife of Thomas Culpeper." Now Thomas Culpeper was in the crowd like you are right now going, "No, not me." Too late. He was immediately dragged out the crowd and executed right there. Love doesn't last, ladies. Jane Boleyn was executed immediately after Catherine because she knew of her mistress's affair but had failed to inform the king. Back then, that was a crime punishable by death. And the last one I'm going to tell you about is one that I'm very sympathetic to. 12 years later, the axe would fall again, and this time the victim was the tragic, innocent, 16-year-old Lady Jane Grey, the uncrowned queen of only 9 days. Now Lady Jane was a pawn in the struggle for power. After the death of her cousin, King Edward VI, she was proclaimed queen, placed on the throne by her ambitious relatives. Jane ruled from the White Tower for only 9 days, until the rightful heir, Queen Mary Tudor, regained the throne by force of arms. Now Lady Jane and her young husband, the 19-year-old Lord Guildford Dudley, were brought back into the Tower under sentence of death, following their trial for high treason at London's Guildhall. Lady Jane was imprisoned in the Gentleman Jailer's House, number 5, Tower Green, which is that second blue door to the left of the Beauchamp Tower. From that window above that door, she saw her young husband, the 19-year-old Lord Guildford Dudley, dragged out of the Beauchamp Tower, taken up to Tower Hill for public beheading. 1 hour later, she saw his headless corpse being brought back into the tower in a small handcart and immediately buried beneath the floors of the royal chapel. Now, if that wasn't anguish enough for a young 16-year-old girl, she would have seen the carpenters preparing the scaffold site for her own execution later that morning. It was a cold February morning, the 12th of February 1554. In my eyes, probably the most tragic day in English history. Everybody that comes to the Tower of London only seems to talk about Queen Anne Boleyn, and I understand why, but literally nobody mentions this young, well-educated, beautiful 16-year-old girl. It is stated she walked out to that blue door. She didn't whine, she didn't whimper, she placed her neck on a block of solid oak one cold February morning and paid the ultimate price for her ambitious relatives. So I beseech you all, when you leave the Tower today, read up about Lady Jane Grey, because in my eyes, the most innocent and the bravest of the lot. Right, now cheered you all up. You look really happy. I'm going to leave you with a smile on your face. I'm going to talk to you in the next 5 minutes about somebody who is just as famous, if not pretty much infamous, in the Tower of London. I'm going to leave you with talking about me. Now, when most of you arrived here today, you have no idea who we are. We are yeoman warders, nicknamed the Beefeater. Now, we got that nickname, Beefeater, when we lived in the White Tower with the kings and queens, because we are their royal ceremonial state bodyguard. We fed from the king's table predominantly livestock, predominantly beef. The peasants outside, some of them who were very hungry, got very jealous, and out of spite, nicknamed us the Beefeaters. Don't worry, children, we also eat our vegetables. Now, to become a yeoman warder or a Beefeater, you have to serve a minimum of 22 years in the British Armed Forces. You must obtain the rank of Sergeant Major and hold the Long Service and Good Conduct Medal. If you have those 3 prerequisites, you can then apply to become a yeoman warder, if a job exists, but they are very, very rare. You have to wait for somebody or die to become a yeoman warder. That's why there have only been 411 yeoman warders since records began. I know there are only 411, because I'm number 409. Just over a year ago, I was the new boy. I got sworn in on Tower Green when I passed my probation. I was then sworn in as a protector of the Crown Jewels, the Tower of London, and all of you people whilst you're here. 7 months ago, I was taken then to the Royal Chapel at St. James's Palace, in front of the royal clergy, with a member of the royal family in attendance, ordained by God as a bodyguard to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. But we only protect the Queen or King on ceremonial and state occasions. So we use very rarely. And because we use very rarely, the Queen has now decided we can give public tours as well. It's a nice easy job. Now I'm wearing blue Tudor undress that was given to us by King Henry VIII. Chainmail would have been worn over the top. This is not a skirt, and unfortunately for me, it's not a kilt. Leg plates would have been inserted to protect your lower half. If you want that kind of action, Soho is where you want to go. Now, in the presence of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, we wear a totally different uniform. A red ceremonial state uniform trimmed in lots of gold. Each tunic costs in excess of £15,000. Oh, they only give us one of them. In our right hand, we carry an 8-foot spear, which is called a partisan. In our left hip, we have a double-edged Wilkinson sword. We are the inner cordon to Her Majesty's Royal Bodyguard, but as I stated, only on rare occasions. For example, a king or queen's coronation, wedding, or funeral, or whatever the queen or king decides they want us to. So the remainder of that time, we get to live in a royal palace of fortune. It is a massive honour. It's probably the most sought after job in the whole of the British Armed Forces. I've just served 24 years in the army. I will now serve another 20 plus years as the Queen's Royal Bodyguard. But there is nothing better, ladies and gentlemen, than riding your own Harley Davidson over your own drawbridge. Ladies and gentlemen, if you've enjoyed my tour today, there is such a thing as TripAdvisor, Tower of London. My name is Yeoman Warder Scott Kelly. You will not forget Scott Kelly. There are only two as far as I'm aware. One became an American astronaut. He failed to become a Yeoman Warder. If you found anything that I said today slightly upsetting or offensive, my name's Yeoman Warder Smith. If you forget Yeoman Warder Scott Kelly, just remember #BP409. Lastly, before you go, I'm going to make my way over by the White Tower. If any of you would like a picture with the best looking, ladies make an orderly queue, do not rush me. Gentlemen, get to the back. My daughter has come to visit me today. I live the other side of this White Tower in the hospital block, the penthouse apartment. She is at that window right now, waiting for her daddy to come back and make her some lunch. She will know that I'm fairly new. She will know how well I've done by the ruckus amount of cheering and applause I get. Notice, if it's not very good, if you walk around that corner, look up at that top window, and you may see a tear rolling down her face, and you will all be to blame. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm Yeoman Warder Scott Kelly, and it's been an honour. Thank you very much.
Det er der, vi går. Hvor er han?
Så skal vi se.
Nej, det er ham med den anden.
Skal du have et billede her? I dag der skal vi på cruise, lunch cruise, og have lidt frokost herfra Millennium Pier, lige ved Tower Gate Bridge. Og The Tower, I kan se oppe i baggrunden. Ligger deroppe. Så var vi inde forleden dag jo. Today we are having our lunch on the Thames River and look for all the historical buildings, for instance Tower Bridge, as you can see here, and we will also pass by several other icons. Here can be mentioned the Eye of London. We were talking about trying this, but the missus did not dare to do it. Maybe it's because it was so high up, but I will not say maybe next time, because I don't think we will come back here again. So, okay. Later. See you later. Så har vi fået vores bord. Det ser sådan ud. This is our table with at the window. So it's exciting. The boat looks like this from the inside. Så min kone, hun er i gang med mobiltelefonen.
Og det der bare bliver skrevet. Happy birthday, sir. Lucas.
This is the Tower Bridge. And the tower is located at the shore. Det var derovre fra vi sejlede. Now we get a peek down the river. And now we are going under the London Bridge.
It's cooling down.
I would not hope that. Så skal vi lige under another bridge. And yet another, and yet another, and yet another. And now our food has arrived. Look delicious. Can't wait to taste it. Bit of bread. And now we have a view to London Eye. Just when we pass by this bridge, there's a view to London Eye. Just there.
On one of those rare sunny days in London, the shard sparkles like a diamond.
London's skyline today freely mixes modern and historic buildings. Personally, I love the eclectic look, but not everyone agrees. Some Londoners have a very cheeky attitude.
Have we come to bed?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Now we are sailing under the Tower Bridge.
And check it out.
Og så kom and then the cake for the coffee came. And it looks like this.
Du har ikke fået nogen fra hotellet.
Happy birthday. Today is my big day. Very nice. It was my wife's fault. She could not shut up. Jeg tager bare toget. I'm going to take the train home wherever we land.
We're drunk. That was very English. They have a little. Det er nok James, tror jeg.
Det kan godt være.